Hello, everyone. This will be a screencast lecture over the emergence of the modern nation of Israel. And this will be the first of our focus countries for our unit over the Middle East and North Africa. Here's a little bit of geographic kind of background over the nation of Israel. First of all, there's few countries in the world that have such an important kind of a geopolitical um, role that they play in the world um, than Israel. It's a very small country, about the size of the U.S. state of New Jersey, I believe. If you look at like the narrowest points across the country, it's only about 50 miles across, and it's approximately about 300 miles from northern border to southern border. And the population of the country is only right around 8 million people. Um, they are in a very important strategic location. You can kind of see the surrounding countries in this map: Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon in the north. This map also indicates some other important locations that I'll make reference to later: the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, the Golan Heights. This area down here, which is labeled as Egypt, is part of Egypt, but this area is referred to as the Sinai Peninsula. You can't see the far southern part of the peninsula, and it is part of Egyptian territory. Um, the main kind of points of emphasis that I want to focus on for this section, and kind of looking at what our kind of essential focus question is posted right here. What is the background of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and what are the key issues that continue to cause conflict today? So here's some background before we get into more, and then you have some reading and other assignments to do. Here's some background about Israel today. They're a parliamentary democratic system, basically a democratic socialist with a parliamentary political system. Their current prime minister is Benjamin Netanyahu, and Benjamin Netanyahu has been serving as prime minister since 2009. He also was prime minister, I think, for a 3-year period back in the 1990s. He is their longest serving prime minister, and he just recently won another controversial election where political corruption had come into play, some campaign finance issues, I believe, that he had been connected to, but he has been able to maintain his position as prime minister, and I believe is supposed to hold that for another 18 months. So a new prime minister right now is supposed to take over in the um, early part of what I guess would be, I guess, the middle part of 2022. I guess that would be 18 months from now. Some key points: that the US and Western Europe have been closely tied to Israel, and you can kind of see the economic assistance the United States gives them every year. Most of this for like military assistance. We see them as a key military partner. They're very strong military, a diverse economy, a lot of high tech um, um, computer equipment or computer software programs, especially computer security programs, I think, are created by Israeli companies. And another key thing to remember as we focus on this section is that Israel is basically seen as a very, very important friend and ally of the United States by the US government, and has been for years. But most Eastern nations kind of see Israel in a negative light because of the long periods of conflict that they've had. So let's talk a little bit about some of those background issues. Um, Israel, in the modern sense, has its creation in the movement that's known as Zionism. Zionism was a, a kind of the modern day had the modern day goal of recreating the ancient Jewish state that had been destroyed back during the period of the Roman Empire. And all this is, of course, going back to their ancient religious belief system that the Jewish people were a chosen people by God, and that there is a promise from God that the area of Canaan, Palestine, Israel, the Holy Land, however you want to refer to that area, historically is a land that was given to them by God and destined to be theirs. And so the modern day movement, which was to try to rebuild that that ancient land, is called Zionism. And Zion refers to a hilltop in the capital city of Jerusalem, which is kind of the central point of the beginnings of Judaism. And all of this goes back to the biblical stories of Abraham, Isaac, um, and the covenant with between God and Abraham. And I'll have you do some reading selections about that. The modern day state of Israel gets its beginnings mostly after the First World War period. The Jewish settlers that were in the area of Palestine that had been moving back there to try to reestablish this ancient state, they gave assistance to the British during World War I to fight against the Ottoman Turkish Empire, and with the belief that they thought the British government would help them create a modern day state. There's a agreement, I say agreement, called the Balfour Declaration that the British issued that indicated that Great Britain might assist them in creating this modern state. Britain said that wasn't really the case, but it was part of the reason why more Zionists began to migrate back to the area of Palestine from where mostly from Eastern Europe. World War II, of course, you have the Holocaust that takes place, and with the decimation of Jewish culture and citizenry in Europe, there was another strong movement for the refugees to then go back to the area of Palestine and to live there and recreate this Jewish state. So after World War II, what happens is the United Nations establishes a two state solution by giving this gray area to the Palestinian Arab people that lived in that region and had been living there for, of course, hundreds and hundreds of years. But these beige areas were then given to the Jewish immigrants who were coming back in as a attempt to give them a homeland to try to solve some of the I guess problems that had developed mainly as a result of the Holocaust. So the United States was supportive of this UN decision, as well as were most other UN countries. The nations that opposed it were the Arab states, who said it wasn't right to give this land that had been populated by Arab people for centuries to Jewish people who had not lived there for centuries and centuries. So promising to oppose this agreement were all the Arab nations. And as soon as Israel declared its independence after the UN makes this decision, Egypt, Syria, you can't see Iraq on here, but Iraq and Jordan and Lebanon, these surrounding areas, all attacked Israel, and so you have the beginning of their long periods of wars that took place between them and their Arab neighbors. These are the listings of these major wars that took place. The War for Independence, Israel was able to maintain its independence, although they did lose some territory that they had control of. Israel was able to defeat Egypt in the 1956 war. The big war that was significant, that made a lot of difference in land changes, was the Six-Day War. And in 1973, the Yom Kippur War was also won by Israel. And the Six-Day War is a big one because that's where some big land changes took place. And all the areas that were significant with that were these ones in green: Gaza Strip, West Bank, Gaza Strip, Golan Heights, West Bank, and the Sinai Peninsula. And in this war also, Israel was able to regain control of the city of Jerusalem, which I did not mention earlier. Jerusalem had been established originally in 1947 as an international city that did not belong to either the Palestinian Arabs in the gray areas or the Israelis. So if you notice in this new map over here after 67, Jerusalem was taken back over or taken over by Israel, and they always have considered it as their ancient capital. So long series of conflicts have taken place during this time. The Palestinian Arabs that lost all the land in these conflicts, they basically were displaced to neighboring countries, mainly over to Jordan. And they've had a series of uprisings that have taken place over the years to try to regain their lost land. In 1979, there was a significant peace treaty that Israel signed with the nation of Egypt, which was the first time Israel signed a peace agreement with any of the Arab countries that they'd had long conflicts with. And the last big negotiated agreement was one that was settled in the early 1990s, and it's called the Oslo Accords. And that's the one that is kind of the main focus for modern day peace attempts. In this peace agreement, I'll show you a close-up view of that here just a second. Oops, sorry. I thought I had a better view of this map. But looking at this map, this was what that peace agreement was supposed to determine. Here you see this area in green, which is the area that Israel controls. This area right here is also generally controlled by Israel. This is the area called the West Bank. And as part of the Oslo Agreement, these mustardy color areas were all eventually to be turned back over to the Palestinian Arabs, because this was the territory that the Palestinians were given by the UN back in 1947, this area and the Gaza Strip. The brown areas are areas that in 1993 that immediately the Palestinians got control of. So you can see here around Jericho, Bethlehem, Hebron, the Gaza Strip, these were all immediately given to the Palestinians. And then the goal was that eventually these mustardy color areas would be given back to the Palestinians too. And so they would have self-rule in those areas. But the problem is that there was conflict that immediately began to take place. The leader of Israel, a man named Yitzhak Rabin, at that time, their prime minister, was assassinated right after that peace treaty, not by Palestinians, but actually by an Israeli Jewish extremist who thought the peace treaty went too far. And then Palestinian Arabs, many of them didn't like the agreement either. One of the main groups is called Hamas, and they do not want Israel to exist as an independent country, and they have gained over the years complete political control of the Gaza Strip area. As a result of that, Israel has blocked trade from Gaza, which has caused like a huge humanitarian crisis in the region. And the people in Gaza have really suffered over the past decade or more now. Actually, it's probably close to a little bit more than a decade that this has been going on. There's continued attacks from other Palestinian terrorist groups like Hezbollah that have continued to attack Israel because they believe that the Israelis are not doing enough to allow the Palestinians to be able to exist and to have an independent country. Basically, the Palestinian Arabs want to have their independence, and they want the land that was given to them by the UN back in '67 back from Israel. So that's kind of the general situation, minus one other issue. And I wanted to show you this because I'm going to have you watch some video about it. This is what Israel has done to try to stop terrorist attacks from coming out of Palestinian controlled areas. This pink and reddish area is a whole series of walls that Israel has built to try to wall in the Palestinians, to keep them separate from Israeli populations and try to prevent terrorist attacks. So this has been a big sticking point between the two groups, and most of the outside world has really kind of condemned this security fence as a real human rights violation. And so that's been one of the key issues. So that's kind of a quick overview of Israel and the Palestinian situation, and you'll have some reading and some video to watch to summarize a little bit more. Goodbye.